It's time now for the week that was. Let's take a look at the top stories that made headlines around the globe this week. And we are starting in Nigeria, where following a public backlash over the inclusion of people convicted of serious crimes, President Bola Tinubu has reviewed the controversial list of 175 convicts earlier approved for presidential pardon. A statement says the president signed a new instrument of clemency, removing offenders convicted of kidnapping, drug trafficking, human trafficking, fraud, and unlawful possession of firearms. It adds that others on the old list will now have their sentences commuted instead. Arise correspondent Godfrey Oshemoge has the details.
The reviewed lists show that the number of beneficiaries drops from 175 to 120. Among the most notable names is that of Mariam Sanda, who was handed a death sentence for killing her husband in 2017. The government revoked the pardon earlier granted to her, changing it to 12 years in prison. 4 others had their death sentences commuted to life in prison, while 15 others were pardoned outright. The Tinubu administration's review of the presidential pardon lists means that convicts of serious crimes like kidnapping, drug trafficking, human trafficking, fraud, and illegal arms possession will no longer benefit from clemency. This may entail the government taking a tougher stance on insecurity. The decision also reflects President Tinubu's effort to distance his administration from perceptions of leniency towards corruption, insecurity, and organized crime. This balances the constitutional power of mercy with the need for accountability in serious offenses. The initial pardon list had sparked public outrage, but legal analysts say the review shows sensitivity to victims of crime and could help rebuild the trust in the justice system. By revisiting the list after public backlash, the Tinubu administration seems to have set a precedent that clemency decisions can be revisited in the interest of justice and security. Godfrey Oshemoge, Arise News.
Well, it seems the presidency is responding to the outcry of Nigerians following the original pardon list, which a lot of people were surprised to see. Not only Mariam Sanda, which has garnered a lot of attention, but also some notorious kidnappers like Kelvin Ezigbe, who had at that point in time, I believe, kidnapped a senior advocate of Nigeria. People who had been found guilty of not only kidnapping but also attacks on our security forces, the people who put their lives on the line for Nigerians. It seems now that the presidency has done a bit of a U-turn. Now, former Vice President Atiku Abubakar, I believe, said that Tinubu administration acts without thinking. But because we've seen a lot of mistakes of grave magnitude happen like this, where we see lists come out with names of people who are already dead or who have already been given honors in the past. We see misspelled, names of people who are no longer alive. Sometimes but when we talk about these things and sometimes we make light of them, they're not things to be made light of, because these are very serious issues, I think, when it comes to how the presidency is managing its responsibilities to itself and to the Nigerian people. This original mistake should have never happened. It's a lot of the people on those lists are people who should never have been, I believe, in my opinion, granted clemency or even considered in the first place. It's good that they are responsive to the outcry. Mariam Sanda, I believe her term has been reduced to 12 years instead of her being released. But for some people, that's still not justice.
Absolutely, I agree with you. But this is something, this is a sensitive issue that everybody can't hold the same opinion because of the politics around the issue of clemency, and pardons. I'm not so sure if I will come to the conclusion that there can be anybody who does not deserve pardon. And that is not to encourage misbehavior or misdemeanor or to discourage the authorities in charge, like the EFCC, like the NDLEA, etc., who will have done quite a lot of work. And then a few years down the line, they'll see a president come out, and exercise the instrument of clemency. If that has to be done, maybe there's a way that it can be communicated. And the first thing that a good government will look at is that ab initio 175 is a bit too unwieldy. I still think that 34 is kind of unwieldy. Part of the questions we may need to ask is, how many people did Buhari in 8 years grant clemency to? How many people did Jonathan in 5 years, grant pardon to, apart from Alamisia, whose pardon was a bit controversial. But having said that, I think that on the face of it, on face value, you can say that at least the president, appeared to have listened. He appeared to have admitted that, there were errors. Maybe he was misled. We do not know what precisely happened. But then maybe it's also what investigating and probing further, given the sort of names that we saw on the original list. Even the present list, the case of Marian Sanda, which is so recurrent. And then you begin to ask yourself, you begin to wonder that, what is the special interest in this Marian Sanda thing? But then at the end of the day, like the first question I asked Adesua, who does not deserve a pardon, if you know what I mean? And the argument would be made that yes, that an unfortunate issue happened, killed her husband in a very dastardly way, but then she's got 2 kids, that have to be looked after. Has she shown, as the spokespersons of the president are saying, enough remorse to warrant a clemency being granted? We won't know the details here, but of course I'm saying that if we're not going to play God, maybe we shouldn't conclude that there shouldn't be anybody who can be granted pardon or clemency. But for me, even if you're going to do that, maybe if you do 1, 2, 3 in 2 years, maybe Nigerians will not have reacted in the manner that they did. But then 175 cut down to 34. Even the 34, you are still saying, there are people bad enough who should have their sentences committed. Not too tidy, but then this is an opportunity to further encourage the presidency to say, get it right, do it in a lot cleaner way, so that subsequently we won't have to come back to where we were in 2025. Pay attention to detail.
Exactly.
Basically.
Just pay attention to the fine print. I think that the Miriam Sanda case was particularly poignant because at the time when she was going through her trial, it was televised. We all saw how controversial her case was. So to see her sentence reduced to 12 years, there's still even argument as to whether or not she even deserves that, as to whether or not she should, because her case was, she was supposed to be sentenced to death.
She was sentenced.
She was sentenced, rather, to death by hanging, but that has now been reduced to 12 years. She's already served about 5 of that. But I think all in all, the people on this list, there are so many more people in prison. Unfortunately, there are even people that are serving prison sentences for crimes that they did not commit. There are people who are still awaiting trial in prison. So while we're reviewing the sentences of people who murdered people or people who were involved in drug trafficking crimes or illegal mining, I would also like for us to pay a little more attention to the state of our prison system in its entirety. Let's ensure that people get their trial dates as at when due. The Constitution states it very clearly that you cannot hold a person beyond 48 hours without at least charging them to court. You need to have a clear system on how these things happen. Unfortunately, we see many cases like this in Nigeria. There are a lot of cases that are still pending appeal. There are people that are in prison for crimes they did not commit. So I think for me, this is all well and good. They, adjusted the list. They didn't pay attention. That does not surprise me a lot. But we could also pay attention to the other issues that I also think requires just as much attention. But let's move on to the United States now, where United States President Donald Trump has declared Nigeria a country of particular concern in response to allegations of a Christian genocide in the country. Trump announced his decision in a Truth Social post on Friday, which was shared on the White House's X handle. That's interesting. Truth Social is America's social platform. X is Elon Musk, so it's kind of weird seeing both hand in hand. Anyway, according to a publication by the Family Research Council in 2022, to declare a country of particular concern is an official designation typically made by the U.S. government, primarily the Secretary of State, under specific U.S. laws. The exact meaning and implications of the designation depend on the specific legislation applied, but it generally indicates that a country engages in activities detrimental to U.S. interests or universal human standards. Now, the question for me is, does Nigeria, with regards to insecurity, engage in any kind of activity that could be detrimental to international, or let me say global standards as it pertains to safety of lives and properties in the in Nigeria, of the people in Nigeria? Are there issues in Nigeria that are matters of grave concern as it pertains to the safety and security of people's lives and concern? I think that it's been really interesting to see the reaction to the term Christian genocide. We're seeing a lot of argument as to whether or not it is a Christian genocide and why the US should be very careful in labeling Nigeria as a country that engages in Christian genocide. But for me, I think I will never, ever stop saying that insecurity is a matter of urgency in Nigeria. At this point, I think I would even dare to say that we need help. It is a serious issue. We have been tackling it for the longest time, and we still continue to tackle it, but it still continues to happen in such a dastardly manner as though we've almost lost our sensitivity to the issues. And that's what it is for me. Insecurity remains a problem. Banditry remains a problem. Farmer-herder crisis, clashes remain a problem. I just find it interesting that we're so particular about the word, the genocide. Are Christians and Muslims dying? Yes. Would I call it a genocide attack at Christians? No. Okay. But that doesn't change the fact that we do have issues that are just as bad as a Christian genocide.
Right. I think the issue is very clear, and it is sad that we have gotten to this point, even though it is not surprising to anybody that President Donald Trump of the US, will again, for the second time, designate Nigeria as a country of particular concern. He did it in his first term, if you remember, when Muhammadu Buhari was the president. And I don't think that his rhetoric has changed much from what he said. If you recall the visit that late President Buhari had, the state visit to the US at that time, and I do recall quite, vividly how Buhari marshaled his argument when they had that joint press conference, and Trump was hammering on the fact that why are you killing Christians? Why are Christians being killed in your country? What are you doing to stop it? And Buhari made explanations as to the difference between bandits and herders and terrorists and things like that, and what they were doing, how it was in our favor that America was able to deal with ISIS, given the fact that a unit of Boko Haram either identified with ISIS or were even an offshoot of ISIS. So coming back about 6 or thereabout years later, after all the preparations that we have seen, Ted Cruz, Bill Maher, everybody talking about the fact that Nigeria might be redesignated as CPC. I think what is different this time around will be the usage of the word genocide, which they didn't use as at that time. They were concerned about the fact that Christians were dying. And of course, we know that Christians were dying, are still dying. And it's a shame that this thing has festered since 2009, when we've been dealing with the issue of Boko Haram. But then is President Trump right to have gone back? As I said again, I'm not surprised. But this, for me, clearly, has to do with two major issues. First will be, how is our government dealing with the internal issues that has led to where we are today? And I like what the Honorable Minister of Information did on CNN a couple of days ago, trying to explain. But there's a way that optics play an important role in this. When Buhari was there, his vice president was a Christian, a pastor. The head, a good number of the service chiefs, and the advisor to the president, on security, were Christians. Not so anymore. Optics, in terms of why you might want to think that why are Americans so concerned, about this issue. The second part will be, how are we even dealing with the United States of America in terms of diplomacy? First will be the surprising issue that up till now we still do not have an ambassador who is interfacing with the United States, beyond the fact that, let the minister go and speak on CNN, let some non-state actors who claim that they can talk to a few people in America go and intervene, bring funny people to Nigeria to go and do an assessment. who is actually intervening on behalf of Nigeria? And the other point, which is related to it, will be that, is this just about passive genocide or Christians dying, or is there something that the American government is responding to and therefore using the idea that Christians are dying? Because we know about the issue of will we allow condemned criminals to be brought to Nigeria? Nigeria said no, we are not going to allow that. If you cast your mind back at this one, Kachi, to when Obama was there and the issue of the LGBTQ and the response that we got from the Obama administration, which led to not selling arms to Nigeria at that time. It was, as a matter of fact, it was even Trump that changed that when Buhari went there and then, allow arms to be sold to Nigeria. So there may be undercurrents that, in my opinion, we do not seem to be dealing with them adequately, in terms of international diplomacy. Yeah. And that is where my worry is, not just in the rhetoric of, genocide or no genocide. And what does it mean to designate anybody as CPC, frankly speaking,
Yes, so let's talk about that, what it means to designate a country as a country of particular concern. First of all, there are two main reasons why America says that they wanted to do this. One is that they said that the Nigerian government was tolerant of or slow to act to terrorist attacks. And the second is that they cited the blasphemy laws in 12 states in Nigeria, and that people are held either, in jail or found guilty under blasphemy laws in a third of the states in Nigeria. Now, these things are factually true. Do those things equal a Christian genocide? Is what, we have been arguing about. Proponents say that Christians are targeted in certain areas of the country, that we've seen targeted attacks at churches or in Christian areas, and therefore people have died. However, Nigerians have argued, our government has argued that our security situation is complex, and that this idea that America is therefore exporting the idea of what a Christian genocide would look like and placing it on our security situation. If we take only Kwara State, for example, we have them dealing with Mahmuda, that's an offshoot of Boko Haram. We have Jainim, a terrorist group that has been building itself up in Mali and Burkina Faso, as of July, posting videos and claiming that they are now in Nigeria from the Kainji Forest in Kwara State. We have Nigeria dealing with offshoots of ISIS-funded terrorist groups, whether it's ISSP or ISWAP, as well as Al-Qaeda-linked groups like Boko Haram, and then it's various offshoots. And then on top of that, we're dealing with banditry and kidnapping. That is even just in one state. And we've seen this replicated not only in the North Central, we've seen it replicated in the Northeast, we've seen it replicated, across the country. Yes, our security situation is complex. However, when the American government is saying that our government is tolerating or slow to attack, or slow to act to attacks, whether they're targeted or otherwise, for us as Nigerians, we must be honest with ourselves on that issue. We must be honest with ourselves that our government does not seem to be proactive in this state when it comes to insecurity in the country. They are only reactive after something that has happened. That is what it appears to look like to us, because we have been dealing with reiterations of the same thing since, as you said, 2009. And the use of genocide is, as you say, has an undercurrent here. It has to do with Israel. It has to do with people calling what's going on in Israel a genocide, and people then say, and then using, in Gaza, a genocide, and then people are weaponizing that word and turning it to other areas. Yeah. I have seen so many proponents of the Israeli government and what's going on in Gaza. I've now seen them speaking about Sudan. People I have known for 15, 20 years who have never ever spoken about Black people, African lives, who have never cared, did not talk about NSAS, did not say bring back our girls, did not even look for Kony when it was trending in 2012. All of a sudden talking about El Fasher and what is going on in Sudan, because they're like, why are you looking at us in Israel why don't you look at them in Sudan? This use of the word genocide is something that is being weaponized against Nigeria, and it is something that we need to be very wary of, particularly as the security situation continues to devolve in the Sahel region. Yeah. If we're looking at what's going on with Jainim in Mali, we should be very afraid if they're posting videos saying that they're in Nigeria. This is something that I believe, beyond this designation as CPC. When you designate a country as CPC, you might bring economic sanctions, you might reduce financial aid, you might have visa bans.
It looks like that's where Trump is going.
It looks like that is where he's
and
going.
And he gave a hint, to say,
exactly.
Committee chair, this this and that start working.
And I would implore the Nigerian government and the people who are in charge of our foreign relations here to be very careful and very proactive, because I do think that we're making a mockery of our country and ourselves if we allow someone like Mr. Nuggets, was his name, Reno Mockery, to position himself as some sort of spokesman for Nigeria. We need to be very serious. The world is changing. This new multipolar world is a very different world than it was before Trump came back for the second term. So we need to take this very seriously.
Very, very seriously. But of course, we must keep emphasizing and encourage government to emphasize that there's still genocide against Christians in Nigeria.
100%.
However, we have, serious challenges as far as security is concerned, and government must do a lot more than they are currently doing. All right, we move on. At least 21 states in Nigeria depend on allocations from the Federation Account Allocation Committee for more than 70% of their total revenue. And that's according to a new report by Budget Foundation. The report also disclosed that 29 states rely on FAC for at least 50% of their total revenue. Titled, A Decade of Subnational Fiscal Analysis, Growth, Decline, and Middling Performance. The State of States 2024 report was presented on Tuesday in Abuja by Budget Group Head of Research and Policy Advisory, Vayala Kwaga. An interest.
Finance Minister and Coordinating Minister of the Economy, Wale Edu's optimism rests on a wave of promising indicators. According to the National Bureau of Statistics, Nigeria's GDP grew by 4.23% year-on-year in the second quarter of 2025, while headline inflation eased to 18.02% in September, down from 19.12% in August. The Central Bank of Nigeria reports that external reserves climbed to a 6-year high of $42.03 billion in September, raising hopes for greater foreign exchange stability. At the same time, the Federal Inland Revenue Service achieved a record-breaking 47.39 trillion naira in collections between October 2023 and September 2025, surpassing target by 15% and making 22.59 trillion naira in the first 9 months of 2025 alone. Despite these upbeat figures, economists and citizens question whether the growth reflected genuine improvement in living conditions. They point to persisting high food prices, unemployment, and the government's ongoing borrowing, even amid strong revenue performance. Analysts say the challenge is twofold: turning fiscal gains into visible progress, better infrastructure, jobs, and household spending, and justify continued borrowing while revenue hits record levels. Many agree that Nigeria now stands at a crossroads between economic recovery and public skepticism. Frank Omalape, Arise News.
Interesting, not surprising to anybody that basically more than 70% of the states are not as viable as they want us to make us believe, even with the large amount of money that they claim that they are getting now at this point in time, which for me is not just, it doesn't have to do with the reality on ground alone, but with also the agitation for those who are calling for more states.
Yep.
Because this is part of what we should consider. If 70% of the current states depend solely, 70% of their allocation comes from federation account, why would anybody be calling for? I don't want to mention any names because all the states, have one or two that they're looking for.
I can mention some of the names because anytime I'm in the House of Representatives and then there's an act for a bill to amend the Constitution to create Ibadan State. Ijebu State.
Why did you go to Ibadan first?
I had to go to Ibadan first. Anioma State. And I'm just there confused because apart from the fact that they're heavily reliant on FAC allocations, we also have 458 billion of the 20 states have borrowed 458 billion in the first half of this year alone.
Absolutely.
They are highly indebted. As you said, they're not viable. They're not functioning properly. So why do you want to be carving out new states if it's not just rent-seeking behavior?
Exactly.
It's
zero value creation.
It is ridiculous. In fact, we had this conversation on the morning show. I think it was 2 Sundays ago. And I'll tell you what I was made to understand. It has a lot to do with the geopolitical concern. And the fact that, the East, for instance, the Southeast, if there are more states added, then they can be on an equal basis with other geopolitical zones within Nigeria, which means that they would also be getting more money, in quote. Now, the thing I still said, and I'm still saying now, is, okay, this more money, this is the result. The states that we currently have, the states that currently exist, are so undermanaged. They're so mismanaged, and they're going through a lot. The people, and I keep referencing a comment somebody made that aside Lagos, every other place is a rural area in Nigeria. And that speaks to what we currently have as states. So these states that we are adding on, what is the basis for it? If not, nothing that has to do with the welfare of the people, who are now going to have to now start debating where they are from, where their land lines cross and where it doesn't. We're seeing the issues with the Ijaw and Ishekiri? That was the delineation. We saw the Warri delineation saga, as I would like to call it. And these are issues that oftentimes stem from that separation that happens. We're about to do this again, where there are going to be people who will still claim the rights to where they were coming from, to say, we got here first. What are the fine lines to these issues? I think this state creation issue really needs to be looked into. But aside from that, why is it so difficult for other states to generate their own income? You have a place like Onitsha in Anambra State that has its own ports, that can and has the capacity to be a Lagos, Nigeria. It is a dilapidated city. Onitsha.
Dilapidated.
I went there.
For Ofala.
For Ofala.
Yeah.
And I was completely heartbroken.
Wow.
I could not spend the night in Onitsha.
So there was no solution there.
There was no solution. I had to stay in Asaba.
Wow.
And let's not talk about the fact that Onitsha to Asaba ideally is 15 minutes. I was doing 40 minutes to 1 hour on the road because of the traffic situation.
It's such a shame because the agitation for states is what local governments, the idea of local government is meant to solve.
Exactly.
And now you want a situation where Nigeria will have more states than the United States of America. Isn't it ridiculous? I don't get it.
For me, I look at the political elite who are agitating for state creation. Maybe there's a senator now who wants to be governor tomorrow, or a member of the House of Reps who thinks if it's a state, then he will now become a senator. He has a chance. Or
and
maybe
the first thing that he will now need to
do
is to look for contract for an airport.
Oh, okay then. But when we talk about these things, because when they say that we want equal footing with one area or the other, or we want more financial or more money, it is not about service or allocation. It's not about service delivery to the people.
No.
And that is the most important thing about government.
Absolutely.
So it's very frustrating. And
if 3/4 of the current states are not viable, it is pointless.
We should be agitated to join them. We should
Absolutely.
be agitated to join this.
Mergers of states.
Mergers of
We won't
states.
talk of acquisition,
No.
but mergers.
Let's talk about mergers, partnerships.
We should be merging. Some people are agitating for regional, government, for some,
Absolutely.
For devaluation of power, for regional government, for mergers.
Or even the 6 geopolitical, zones, maybe make them regions and then give them...
See, these are issues. I
get your point. I get your point.
Because even the states, as independent as they
but
are,
core
there's still more
politicians
issues.
won't see the way that we were saying. But we have to move on.
We have to move on. Well, we are moving on to Cameroon, our dear neighbors, where the long-standing President Paul Biya was this week officially declared winner of the country's presidential election, extending his more than 4 decades in power. Now, at 92, Biya is the world's oldest head of state. He secured 53.66% of the vote, according to the Constitutional Council. His main challenger, former Minister Issa Chiroma Bakari, came second with 35.2%. At a ceremony in Yaoundé, the council president, Clement Atangana, proclaimed Biya's victory to applause from government officials and diplomats. Higher Education Minister Jacques Fam Ndongo praised Biya's re-election, calling it proof of the Cameroonian people's maturity and responsibility. With this win, Biya is now expected to govern until 2032, marking 50 years in power. And of course, if he stays alive, he would be just shy of his 100th birthday.
I mean, I don't know.
It's, if we talk about Paul Biya or Cameroon,
I think there's another story that we should join to it.
Yes, because we're talking about Africa's gerontocrats.
Exactly. Now, Djibouti's parliament has also voted unanimously to lift the presidential age limit, clearing the way for President Ismail Omar Guelleh to seek a sixth term in 2026. Now, the amendment removes the 75-year age gap that would have barred the 77-year-old leader from running again. Now, Guelleh, who has ruled since 1999, is one of Africa's longest-serving leaders. Right groups condemned the move, calling it a step toward a life presidency, while officials defended it as necessary for stability in the troubled Horn of Africa region. Parliament will confirm the decision in a second vote on November 2nd. And he won his last election in 2021 with more than 97% of the vote. In moments like this, I just have to say that I'm Nigeria, we actually are not that bad. We are not.
This is when you appreciate Nigeria.
To be honest,
in spite of all our issues.
In spite of all our issues and in spite of everything that's been said today, I want to appreciate our political class for at least respecting democracy and our constitution. Because
at least since 1999, we've not done too badly in terms of what democracy,
The trend across the continent.
What's this?
When we're looking at this, because we must, when I look at Paul Biya, I call him, he's one of our lead gerontocrats in Africa. These aging men who refuse to let go of the reins of power. But it's very possible that it's not Biya who's holding on to power now. It might be his handlers, because he's known to not be very well, to the point where they're taking effigies and paper mache statues of him to go on campaign, because the man can't physically go himself. But what situation we're seeing in Cameroon is a very tense situation. We must be careful. First of all, there was antagonizing for a separation. The Anglophone segment of Cameroon wanted to create their own independent state of Ambazonia. That precedes this, right? And the political repression of that area also precedes this. Very importantly, Chiroma Bakari is from the northern region. If we remember,
he was a minister, wasn't he?
He was a spokesman and a minister for Paul Biya, but he was one of two key northern allies in northern Cameroon, that left Biya and separated from that in the last 2 years. He was one of the two key ministers and allies in the north that left the Biya camp. We have to think about our history here, because there was a referendum that made part of Anglophone Cameroon actually join Nigeria, if we remember, in the 60s. So these are very important things that have now fueled what we're seeing today in Cameroon. We have a gerontocrat that has been in power longer than before the Berlin Wall fell, before the internet was created. Now we even have ChatGPT and AI. He came before everything. I understand he's seen like 3 popes. He's seen like changes in the British royal family.
Nigerian presidents since Shagari up till Ashwaji Bola Ahmed Tinubu.
It is absolutely.
So every time they go to the AU meetings, he sees different presidents, from Nigeria. And he's just I'm sure that he probably calls them the same name, because he won't even.
He won't remember.
You've seen videos of him not even being sure where he is or why he's there, or
what to say.
And then on top of
somewhere
that, we
between
look to
Switzerland and France, you will find it, but certainly not in Cameroon.
Then you look over to what's going on in East Africa. You look at what's happening in Djibouti. You look at what's happening currently in Tanzania,
in Uganda.
In Uganda, where Museveni, his election is coming up in January next year. When we're looking at this, we have to be very wary of people who are unwilling to let go of power, and at the same time, on the other opposite heartbreaking end is autocratic leadership and military leadership, also in our own backyard.
Absolutely.
That is not necessarily having any more positive outcomes.
Yeah, I mean, very quickly for me, this speaks to the type of democracy that we are practicing in many parts of Africa. Was it Obasanjo or somebody who suggested the idea of Afro-democracy?
Yes,
exactly, General Obasanjo, or Chief Obasanjo, we shall say. Maybe we should begin to reconsider what he had in mind if we are not able to deal with the sort of democracy that is practiced elsewhere. But then at least they have Nigeria to serve as a model. Not in, maybe not in every area.
Maybe had a change in party.
Absolutely. So if we're dealing with coups in other parts of Africa, I'm not talking about the rumors here in Nigeria, and we're dealing with the other civilian coups. Because for me, it's a coup when the first thing that you do as a president is to change the constitution and then remove age limit, as was done by Paul Biya in Cameroon, as was done by Gwele in Djibouti, and
In
many
Togo,
other parts. It's a coup
it's
against the people. It's
Yes.
a coup against the constitution. So these are the things, in my opinion, that not just ECOWAS, but African Union in particular should begin to discuss. And I think that Nigeria is more than qualified to lead such a discussion, and South Africa too, because at least, and Ghana, to an extent, because at least we show some good example, where it matters. I've mentioned it here before in 1998, 27 years ago, when Umabongo was going to run for re-election. From The Guardian, I was part of the team, a young journalist, went there with Dr. Tuji Abayamin, an ambassador, what was the name again, who was part of those who led the Nigerian delegation. And then we go to the presidential palace. Why are you running after 27 years? He said, who told you that all the other guys who are running against me will leave after 8 years if they defeat me? And therefore, he didn't see anything bad in it. Fast forward to the fact that Umabongo is no longer alive. Who succeeded him? His son. So this is not democracy in many parts of Africa. And this is where AU should step in correctly, come correct when it comes to democracy in Africa. I've heard people who say Ashwaju Tinubu should not honor if the invitation comes from Paul Biya during his inauguration. That's a little thing for me. I mean, it doesn't mean anything. What is important is the position of AU when African leaders assault the constitution of their people that allows them to stay forever. That is where the battle should start from, not attending the inaugurations or not attending. That's not an
I
issue.
don't even know if Biya would say it within his heart to even go to his own inauguration.
Honestly, I don't know if it's well
But
enough.
beyond just the AU, because just honing in on that, because we also have our regional blocks. But there's been a conversation about SADC because of what is going on in Tanzania. But of course, the chairman of SADC was the president of Mauritius, who has now been stripped of his
He's out of
his
office.
and his office. And we had the same thing with ECOWAS, and when we have our own regional bloc breakup, and then 3 countries from the Alliance of Sahel States. So beyond just AU, it's also what is SADC doing? What is what's going on in East Africa? What's going on in ECOWAS?
Africa is challenged. We should revisit the idea of Afro-democracy and see where at least that Nigeria, South Africa, Ghana
I don't know if
can
I'll call
serve.
Nigeria first, but I don't know if I'll put our names first. Maybe Botswana.